For centuries, Europe ruled the world. Empires rose, cultures flourished, revolutions shaped history. But now, something is breaking. Birth rates are collapsing, economies are crumbling, entire nations are divided like never before. And beneath the surface, a silent question is growing louder. Could this be the beginning of the end for Europe? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover might change how you see the future of the entire continent. Europe is aging and shrinking. Without young people, there is no future. Europe is facing a silent crisis that no one seems to talk about. It's getting older, fast. In countries like Germany, Italy, Spain, and Portugal, birth rates have fallen so low that populations are now shrinking. For every child born, there are more elderly citizens entering retirement. It's not a temporary dip, it's a demographic time bomb. This aging population means fewer workers, more pensioners, and an overwhelming strain on public services. Healthcare systems are collapsing under pressure. Pension funds are running dry. Who will pay for the future when there are fewer young people to carry the weight of an entire continent? Meanwhile, the younger generation that does exist is leaving. Many are moving to other countries, escaping low wages, high taxes, and a lack of opportunities. The brain drain is real, and Europe is bleeding talent at a terrifying rate. What's left behind is a fragile economy and a population that's simply too old to rebuild it. Governments try to mask the crisis with immigration, but this brings its own set of challenges: integration, social unrest, and political backlash. Instead of revitalizing the continent, it's creating deep divisions and fueling populist movements across Europe. And while politicians debate, the population keeps shrinking. If nothing changes, Europe may enter a phase of irreversible decline. Fewer people means less innovation, less productivity, and ultimately is less power. And a continent that once dominated the world could slowly fade into irrelevance, not through war or destruction, but through simple, silent decay. Internal. Divisions are tearing Europe apart, united on paper, divided in reality. The European Union was built on the dream of unity, a promise that former enemies could come together to build something stronger. But today, that dream is cracking. Beneath the surface, Europe is no longer united. From west to east, north to south, deep political, cultural, and economic divides are growing wider by the day. Brexit was just the beginning. The United Kingdom walked away, sending a clear message: the Union is not unbreakable. In countries like Hungary and Poland, clashes with Brussels over democracy, immigration, and national sovereignty are intensifying. In Italy, far-right parties openly question whether the EU still serves their people. And in France, anti-EU protests shake the streets regularly. These divisions aren't just political, they're emotional. Citizens in wealthier nations feel they are being forced to carry the financial burden of weaker economies. Meanwhile, people in struggling countries feel abandoned, treated like second-class members of the club. Resentment is growing, and solidarity is fading fast. Even inside individual nations, unity is crumbling. Catalonia wants independence from Spain. Scotland may still leave the UK. Belgium is practically two countries pretending to be one. As local identities become stronger than European identity, the very foundation of the EU is under threat. If these tensions continue to rise, Europe could face a future no one is prepared for, one where the Union breaks apart, not with a bang, but piece by piece. And once that process begins, it may be impossible to stop. The external threat, Russia, China, and the United States-Europe, is trapped between three superpowers. Europe once believed it could stand as a global power, but in reality, it's increasingly caught in the shadow of three giants: Russia, China, and the United States. Each one has its own agenda, and each one sees Europe not as a partner, but as a battlefield of influence. Russia is the most immediate threat. The war in Ukraine proved how vulnerable Europe is to Moscow's aggression. Countries like Germany relied for years on cheap Russian gas, a decision that turned into a weapon. Now, with energy supplies cut and Eastern Europe on high alert, NATO is the only thing standing between peace and chaos. And that NATO is led by the United States, not Europe. And while Russia uses brute force, China plays the long game. Beijing has quietly bought up ports, telecom infrastructure, and critical industries across Europe. From Greece to Italy, Chinese investments have turned struggling economies into chess pieces on the Belt and Road map. Europe's technological and economic independence slowly being erased. Then there's the United States, supposedly an ally. But since Trump, America has shown it's willing to sacrifice Europe's interests for its own. Trade wars, spying scandals, and pressure to follow US foreign policy have created growing distrust. Europe talks about strategic autonomy, but when crisis hits, it still runs to Washington for protection. Trapped between a hostile Russia, a cunning China, and a selfish America, Europe faces a terrifying question. Does it still have the power to shape its own destiny? Or has it already become a pawn in someone else's game? Islamic radicalism and the crisis of European identity. A new internal conflict is rising, quietly but powerfully. For centuries, Europe prided itself on its cultural identity: art, philosophy, secularism, democracy. But today, that identity is under growing pressure. Waves of migration, particularly from Muslim-majority countries, have reshaped cities, schools, and entire neighborhoods. And while diversity can enrich a society, it can also spark cultural friction when integration fails. In many major cities, Paris, Brussels, Berlin, Stockholm, there are now no-go zones where local laws are ignored and radical ideologies flourish. These areas are often poor, marginalized, and cut off from the rest of society. Extremist recruiters prey on frustration, using social media and mosques to spread anti-Western beliefs, and in some cases, incite violence. The results are undeniable. Terrorist attacks, rising crime, and growing fear among citizens. From the Bataclan massacre in Paris to the beheadings in Nice, these aren't isolated events. They are part of a deeper, systemic failure, a clash of civilizations that Europe refuses to acknowledge out loud. At the same time, politicians are walking on eggshells. Speaking openly about radical Islam can cost votes or lead to accusations of racism, but silence doesn't solve the problem, it fuels it. People feel ignored and betrayed, turning to populist parties that promise to take back control of national identity and borders. If Europe can't find a way to balance openness with security and tolerance with identity, this growing cultural divide could explode, not in one massive war, but in a slow-burning civil conflict that changes the face of Europe forever. Economic collapse and the fall of the euro. When the money fails, everything else follows. The euro was meant to unite Europe, a single currency symbolizing strength and stability. But behind the scenes, it has created deep economic imbalances. Strong economies like Germany and the Netherlands benefit greatly, while countries like Greece, Italy, and Portugal are trapped in a currency they can't control. They can't devalue. They can't print money. And when crisis hits, they suffer the most. Debt levels across the continent are now dangerously high. Italy alone owes over 2.8 trillion euros. France isn't far behind. And as interest rates rise, repaying that debt becomes nearly impossible. One domino could trigger a chain reaction: collapsing banks, bankrupt states, and panic in financial markets across the world. The EU tries to hold everything together with bailouts, stimulus packages, and emergency funds. But how long can they keep printing money without consequences? Inflation is rising, productivity is stagnant, and the younger generation feels locked out of the economy, underpaid, overtaxed, and drowning in uncertainty. If the euro collapses, the EU collapses with it. It would be the biggest financial disaster in modern history, and it wouldn't just affect Europe. It would shake the entire global system. The question is not if another crisis is coming, but when. And this time, Europe might not survive it. Europe will not disappear overnight, but cracks are forming in its economy, in its culture, in its politics. A continent that once ruled the world now finds itself divided, aging, and surrounded by threats. If nothing changes, the fall of Europe may not come with an explosion, but with a slow and silent collapse. And by the time we realize it, it might be too late. If this video made you think or feel something you weren't expecting, don't forget to hit subscribe. We dive deep into the stories the mainstream ignores, Because the truth is never boring. It's just hidden.